Hello and welcome to The Game World Cup Daily from The Times. I'm Natalie Sawyer and thank you for joining us. We're here every match day of the World Cup, podcasting after 10 o'clock UK time every night. In the studio with me, it's a pleasure to be joined by The Times columnist Giles Smith. Hello, Giles.
Hello, Natalie.
Speak to you in just a moment. We won't just be talking about football with Giles. There's also another huge battle that rages during this World Cup and every World Cup, the BBC versus ITV. In Moscow, on Cristiano watch, the great Gab Marcotti and 3 teams are eliminated. Disappointment for Morocco, Saudi Arabia and Egypt. Shortly, we'll be talking Spain, who secure their first victory of this World Cup and their first win under Fernando Hierro. But let's start with an update from the England camp. The England team very much enjoying a rare day off in Russia ahead of that second group match against Panama on Sunday. The Times writer Paul Joyce is with the camp. And Paul, we start with some breaking news, injury news, not concerning a player, thankfully, but the manager.
Yeah, strange old day really. I didn't think we'd be speaking about injury to the manager this morning when we woke up. But yeah, Gareth Southgate dislocated his shoulder today. The team and the squad were given a day off. Some of the players went into St. Petersburg just for a change of scenery. He went on a run, slipped over. The impact was on his right side and he called for help from the England team doctor and has dislocated his shoulder. Went to St. Petersburg for treatment. And yeah, he's going to be in a sling for a few weeks, I would imagine. So no jumping for joy if they score on Sunday.
Well, I was going to say, he can't over-celebrate now, but I'm sure he'll be hoping by the time England lift the World Cup, he'll be recovered to lift it.
Yeah, that must be a target for him now. But yeah, one of the more unusual sort of features of England's time in Rapinoe so far. It was sort of quite low-key for the first week, but obviously now with Gareth's misfortune and the sort of doubts over Dele Alli's fitness, there's one or two issues starting to engulf England ahead of that Panama game on Sunday.
I mean, it's interesting though. Southgate sort of seemed, I want to say, jovial about the problem because he said he was on for a record 10k time.
Yeah, I think he obviously made the point that it's better to be him than one of his players. I think one of the things that stands out about his sort of leadership, not just while we've been here in Russia and in the build-up, but over time, has been how he sort of puts the right emphasis on the important things, and it won't affect the team. And I'm sure there were a few sort of amusing comments from the players when they came across him later on today, because they held a team meeting this evening just to go over the first bits for the Panama game. So I think the focus will obviously be a lot of focus on him at training tomorrow, but then it swiftly moves on.
Giles, this isn't the first time an England member of staff has been injured on World Cup duty, is it?
No, I don't know whether it's too soon to talk about the curse, but last time out there was Gary Lewin, who of course stood on a water bottle and turned his ankle. He was celebrating Daniel Sturridge's equaliser against Italy, I think, and put himself out for the rest of the tournament. I've got to say, we were told before the tournament to worry about the possibility of rabies in the Rapinoe woodlands and the infected wildlife that were going to be a threat to the England squad. But it turns out tree roots, in fact.
Those cursed tree roots.
Yeah.
Paul, you sort of alluded to Dele Alli, and obviously he is the biggest concern on the pitch for England. Is there any update on him?
Well, he's tweeted tonight saying that he's hopeful that to be back in training in the next few days. I don't think the injury's too serious, but it's just obviously it's the timing in tournaments. You know, do you want to risk it against Panama with the all-important game against Belgium 4 days later? If you aggravate anything in the short term, then, you know, with that type of injury, a thigh injury, you're looking at maybe your tournament being over. So I think England will take a very sort of cautious approach with his fitness. I wouldn't expect him to be training tomorrow. And yeah, then it moves on to who comes in really in his place.
Yeah, and you sort of suggested that could be Ruben Loftus-Cheek, and you've spoken to him earlier on, and he had some words to say about his personal future at Chelsea, didn't he?
Yeah, I think he was just being asked the question which he always gets asked. You know, what's going to happen next season? and to a large extent, that's still unknown really, because the manager, we don't know, who the manager is going to be next season at Chelsea. But I think what he's saying is that it's imperative for him to be playing games next season. He went on loan last season, obviously, to Crystal Palace, and I think played 25 games there, showed the promise that everybody has sort of always felt that he's had, and it's just not conducive to his career to go back to, or find himself next season on the sidelines for long periods. He needs to kick on from what everybody hopes will be a good tournament. He showed in flashes on Monday when he came on for that brief period that he's all about power and pace and taking opponents on and beating players. And once the tournament's out of the way, he obviously faces a big decision, because we need to be playing football regularly next season. He's a player that Gareth Southgate really likes and would want to build England around in the future, and remaining at Chelsea and not playing just doesn't seem to be an option.
Roy Hodgson is a big fan of him. You'd imagine Crystal Palace would love the chance to re-sign him, but if he continues to impress at this World Cup, this could be a real shop window for him, couldn't it?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think Roy would like to bring him back. The difficulty will be that if he does well out here, starting games and keep it, maybe even keeping his place, you wonder what that will do to his price tag. And then that has implications for the sorts of teams that can buy him. So there's a lot to be decided on his future in the next few weeks, and how he does in these next games, starting with Panama, will have a heavy bearing on that.
The Game, World Cup Daily from The Times, with Natalie Sawyer.
You can hear live commentary of all of Thursday's games on TalkSport, including Denmark taking on Australia at 1 o'clock, France versus Peru at 4, and the huge clash between Argentina and Croatia live from 7 o'clock on TalkSport. Spain have beaten Iran to go top of Group B, and Gab Marcotti joins us now. And Gab, Diego Costa with the goal in Kazan, although he probably knew very little about it.
Yeah, he himself came out afterwards, talked about how he was certainly fortunate with the double deflection is what you'd call it, and helping Spain break down a really, really, really tough Iran side. It's actually, I don't know how many people know this, but Iran lost after a streak of 23 consecutive competitive games without defeat, which I believe is one of the longest streaks ever, and it's certainly the longest streak by a non-European side.
That's very impressive. And you mentioned how, Spain really had to work hard for their win, because Iran was so well defensively organised under Carlos Queiroz. They really did frustrate Spain, particularly in that first half.
Yeah, and look, I know people are going to look at it and be like, oh, well, all they did was go and park the bus and, it's kind of thing Mourinho would do. But I think we need to appreciate, especially with some of these smaller teams in the World Cup, small in inverted commas, that Iran doesn't play like this all the time. So they're the best team in Asia by going out and attacking other teams and, being the big boys there. And then they get to the World Cup, and they got obviously that good result against Morocco in the opener. And they have to totally change the way they play by becoming such a defensive side, and it nearly worked for them.
It nearly worked, but they won't make many friends, will they, with their sort of play acting and time wasting?
Well, look, I mean, come on, it's the World Cup, right? We're sort of used to this sort of thing. I mean, it's something that I think most teams will get up to, and I'll tell you what, if there's one team that I think a lot of people would say, it's okay to do it against, it's probably Spain, given the presence of Sergio Ramos and Diego Costa in the Spain side, no?
You might have a point there, Gab, but they were denied around a famous equaliser inside the last half an hour, an offside decision which was corrected by VAR. How have you felt VAR has been used in this tournament, Gab?
I think VAR has worked exceptionally well thus far, and look, there's always going to be decisions that people are going to moan about. They're going to complain that it takes too long. I think on this occasion it was quite a long stop because simply because of the dynamic of the play, right? So there was the initial offside directly off the free kick, which turned out that he was onside, and then there was obviously the subsequent one. So, I think World Cup games are so important that if we have to spend an extra 10, 20, 30 seconds, even a minute, waiting for the correct decision, personally, I think it's worth it. And somebody's going to bring up the Harry Kane decision. And look, it's not as if things are going to be perfect, but what we are seeing is a really, really big improvement. And yeah, I think so far so good.
I mean, it is still in its infancy. But Giles, let's go back onto Diego Costa. Such a character. He is someone that we want to see remain at this World Cup for a little bit longer, don't we?
Absolutely. He's just a sort of complete entertainment package. And you watch him in terms of things like facial expressions and his kind of involvement, that sense you have that you're never quite sure what he might do next. People were saying that VAR was going to be very difficult for Diego Costa, might ruin his tournament, hasn't done so far.
Gab, I just want to ask you, is Hierro Spain the one we would have seen under Julen Lopetegui?
Yeah, it's interesting because, Hierro came out and he said, look, I'm not going to change a thing. We've been working towards this for 2 years. Sergio Ramos said, Julen Lopetegui will be with us no matter what. Personally, I don't think there's much of a difference between the Spain team and certainly, what we saw in the qualifiers. And, since they were in Italy's qualifying group, I actually got to see a lot of Spain, right up until Italy decided not to go to the World Cup so they could let somebody else have a go.
It's very kind of them.
So, it was, yeah. Certainly tactically, in terms of ethos, in terms of want to play, it's the same thing. On a man-manager level, I think it's going to probably be a little bit different, simply because, Hierro is a different character. But, Fernando Hierro is a national icon in Spain. He's the guy with 89 caps, the guy who's won 3 Champions League titles, the guy who was there and was sporting director when they won the Euros and the World Cup. In terms of charisma, in terms of gravitas, he's sort of like is to Spain what Trevor Brooking is to West Ham fans.
One thing we noticed on the coverage, Giles, is that the noise of the vuvuzelas appear to be back. They weren't particularly liked at the 2010 World Cup in South Africa, but they are back. And they're big with Iran, it feels like. They
seem to be back with Iran, but with Iran only. I thought the football family had decided to turn its back on the vuvuzela after South Africa, and to the point of banning them actually from grounds. But Gab, am I right? I think it's only the Iranian fans that are making that noise. It's a limited outbreak, or do we have to fear something broader?
I haven't heard vuvuzelas at other games just yet. I have to say, for me, I don't really mind it. It's a couple hours out of my life while I watch a football match, hearing an annoying sound. If the sound of vuvuzelas were to follow me to bed while I go to sleep, or in the shower, or over breakfast, then yeah, I'd have a serious problem with it. But as long as it's contained, I can put up with it. Bit of folklore every 4 years, why not?
Morocco became the first team to be eliminated from the World Cup after their second defeat in a row at the hands this time of Portugal. And it was, who, Cristiano Ronaldo, who got the goal very early on in this one. And with it, Ronaldo becomes the all-time European goal scorer in international football with 85 goals. Gab, that is some achievement.
It's incredible. It's incredible, I think, also, when you consider, and this is what kind of spooks you, is He's second place overall. He's just passed, of course, Ferenc Puskás. The all-time leading goal scorer is actually an Iranian, Ali Dai, who has 109. Now, you would think, that's 24 more than Cristiano. There's no way it can happen. But the creepy thing is, you watch Cristiano, and he's kind of like the bionic man, and he's 33 years old, and you ask yourself, is he capable of scoring 24 goals between now and when he hangs up his boots? And you probably wouldn't bet against him, especially given the way European qualifying is, where, you're pretty much guaranteed, one, probably more often 2 Muppet sides in every qualifying cycle, plus maybe the odd friendly, and you figure, why not?
You, of course, were in Moscow. You were watching Portugal-Morocco, and Ronaldo has achieved almost everything there is to achieve in football. But two things have eluded him. He hasn't won the Golden Boot at a World Cup, and of course he hasn't won the World Cup. So could he, do you think, Gab, be about to break one or maybe both of those ducks?
Winning the World Cup, I think, is a stretch. Portugal were really, really poor today. Fernando Santos, their manager, came out afterwards. He said, it was an unfair result. Morocco really dominated them. And so, once you look at it from that perspective, you realize that this Portuguese side, they're not that good right now. They've kind of done it with smoke and mirrors. They're limited in some ways. They have this tremendous team spirit. Things often get frantic, and you sometimes have Cristiano to save the day, but that's a really big ask for him to do it with the supporting cast the way it is now, with players like Bernardo Silva, who we know can do better, for example, really not producing.
Yeah, I remember in our preview podcast we mentioned their ageing defence, and let's talk about one of those, Pepe, who collapsed to the ground after a strong pat on the back, it has to be said. Could or should he face retrospective action for feigning injury, Gab?
No, I don't think in a situation like that, I don't think it's going to happen. Morocco now out of the World Cup. It's not something that necessarily, impacted the game. They like to try to avoid those situations. But he's certainly doing himself no favor. And I'll tell you what, if you think back to the opener against Spain, I think it was his reputation that also prompted the referee, to let the Diego Costa goal stand. Given that, he gets nudged in the chest and goes down holding his face. Maybe a different player might have been treated differently.
Another sort of remarkable story that's emerged from this World Cup concerns Watford's Nordin Amrabat. And now, he appeared for Morocco wearing a scrum cap 5 days after being diagnosed with a concussion, contrary to the world governing body's guidelines. The guidelines by FIFA say they need 6 days rest, and they are demanding an explanation as to why he was selected. But Amrabat admits he doesn't remember the first game, but played against Portugal wearing a scrum cap, discarded it as he got too hot, and then was asked afterwards why he played, and he said, simply, "I am my own doctor." What do you make of that? I mean, we understand, of course, the World Cup is the pinnacle of a player's career, but that is surely a step too far, playing in that game.
Yeah, I think in principle I agree with you. The reality is, as long as you have team doctors who are paid by FAs, these situations, I think to some degree, we're going to be in danger of them happening. I don't even know is there any scientific advice that his scrum cap would have necessarily protected him? And by the same token, if he says, you know what, I'm taking my scrum cap off, it's been 5 days, I am happy to risk permanent brain damage and serious injury, and I'm making the decision as a fully, as an adult, it's kind of different than somebody who, we saw at the last World Cup, for example, in Uruguay, where the guy appeared clearly concussed and played on. 5 days have passed, presumably 5 days while he's still at risk. It's enough time for him to make a decision about whether he wants to go and take these chances. And you can say he's under undue pressure or whatever, and these are very bad decisions to take, but he's an adult, right?
That's right, and he can make up his own mind, I suppose. But the way Group B looks as it stands is so intriguing. Of course, we know Morocco are out, but Portugal, Spain and Iran all have a chance of progressing. Portugal and Spain level on points with an identical goal difference. Spain are top, having received fewer yellow cards. Iran just a point further back on 3. And what's happening on Monday night is that Spain play Morocco in Kaliningrad. Portugal face Iran in Saransk. Top spot very much up for grabs. Iran know that they have to beat Portugal to reach the knockout stages for the first time in their history. Gab, what is going to happen?
I think Spain are very much in the driving seat at this stage. Obviously, there's Morocco already out. Iran are very good at getting draws, but obviously, given the circumstances, a draw is not going to be enough for them. So, for me, at least, I think I have Portugal and Spain going through.
The Game. World Cup Daily from The Times with Natalie Sawyer.
We'll be giving you a Times trivia teaser question every day on every podcast, as provided by the wonderful Bill Edgar. Last time out, we asked you, which decade featured 2 World Cups in which no semi-finals were played? The answer was the 1970s. in 1974 and 1978, in fact. A second group stage led directly to the final. Our teaser today: who is the only player to have scored a higher number of goals than his shirt number at a World Cup tournament? Tune in to our next podcast to find out the answer. We are through match day 7 at this World Cup, and it's about time we discussed how it's being covered on TV here. And Giles, we've got to start first of all with ITV's set in Russia. It got everyone talking. It's extremely grandiose, would you say? It's
the greatest punditry set that's ever been built, I think. And no one's ever attempted anything as ambitious as this. Actually, ITV have got a bit of form with grandiose sets. They've been going at it for a while. I don't know whether you remember, but in 2014 when they were in Brazil, they had a room in the media centre, same as everybody else, but they chose actually to go out on the beach and set their desk up out there and on a platform with waves kind of running in. And we were treated to the pleasure of Adrian Charles's knees, which we saw most days in his shorts.
I think they were just showing off, weren't they, about the weather? I think,
they were obviously very pleased to be there. And it was actually great fun. It was a really good idea. I mean, and then they moved on from that in France for the European Championships last time, 2 years ago. Again, they could have been in the media centre with everybody else, but they seemed to secure themselves this platform up on the roof. So they were, again, al fresco, and they had a ridiculous table which seemed to have part of the Eiffel Tower, holding it up, the sort of famous Eiffel table that they all sat round, which of course Slaven Bilic famously climbed on in a moment of excitement, and it proved to take his weight, which was quite handy.
Very much so.
So they've been building up to it, but this time they've just gone absolutely wild. I don't expect to see a punditry studio like it ever again. It's sort of part Russian cathedral. It's got this cupola domed roof. It's got kind of faded paintings on the walls that seem to be ancient and yet are of Diego Maradona. And then down below that, on the ground floor, as it were, there's a sort of electric wall, which is like a sort of giant lava lamp, which actually looks a bit like a glass of lager if you look through squinted eyes at it. It's magnificent. It's this cross between something very, very Russian and kind of Christmas in the Arndale Centre. Amazing. Yeah. And by comparison, the BBC studio is very, very modest. The BBC seem to have bought into the whole Gareth Southgate keep it calm vibe with their studio. It's very simple. It looks like a train carriage, in fact. It's a train carriage window. It looks like some train out of Euston that's mysteriously got held up in Moscow Red Square. Beautiful view outside, but nothing much going on inside. And it's funny, but that sort of immediate impression is you think, well, actually ITV are having a lot of fun. And the BBC have to work a little bit harder to look like they're having a lot of fun in their own context. OK, so I'll say maybe, 1-0 to ITV on that one? I definitely give it to them, and I think probably give it to them forever on that. I can't see anybody building a set that's better than that. Yeah, so they've gone the extra mile, and they've gone the extra mile as well by the fact that they've got 4 pundits, and the BBC have got 3. Let's not forget Ian Wright's bright shirts as well. 4 pundits, is that too much? Yeah, no, that possibly backfired on them slightly, I think. There was one match where they came at half time to the 4 of them, and they never got around to talking to Ian Wright. That might have been something personal to do with the shirt they just took against him. They are very bright. They are. He's working through the wardrobe, and the others aren't going with him on it either, which is slightly, which is quite funny to see. It's as if he's the only one who's got that particular invitation. Everybody else is wearing white or pale blue, but Ian Wright consistently just working through the bright ones, standing out, and great. I really like that. But the 4 of them, there's sort of too many of them to talk. It's pretty cramped in those half-time slots, especially with the ad breaks. Whereas the BBC's more modern 3 across the back, as introduced by Antonio Conte, seems to serve them well. Everybody gets a bit of a crack, and of course they're not competing with ad breaks either, so they've all got a bit more time. You mentioned Slaven Bilic, who was arguably the star pundit of Euro 2016. How do you think he's performing this time around? I think he's great. I like the way that he reaches out to the other pundits, and he's very touchy-feely. He thinks it's a contact sport for him, which is good. That doesn't seem to appeal to Roy Keane, who doesn't seem to want to be touched. And notice how Roy Keane stares fixedly ahead and doesn't look at either of the pundits on his left. He will just about deign to look at the presenter, but he's in his own zone. But Bilic, I think he's magnificent. He seems to make the others laugh for reasons that he's not quite clear about, perhaps. But I think he's living up to the standards that he set for himself in the European Championships last time.
I remember
he needs to climb on the table at some point, of course, to bring it all home.
Yes. I do remember at one point he was asked a question about VAR, and his response was simply, "I don't care."
I don't care,
which was brilliant.
Yeah, it was. Which
just
was
honest and refreshing. We can't not discuss Mark Lawrenson. He is probably Marmite. That's the best way to describe him.
Well, some people quite like Marmite, though.
I love Marmite. Not to say I love Mark Lawrenson. I'm not saying I do or don't love Mark Lawrenson, but he is always one of the top trends on Twitter when he is co-commentating. He has a grumpy persona, doesn't he? Where do you stand on Laura?
Well, I actually think it's a broad church, and I think there's room for someone like Laura. He is very, very old school in the sense that he seems to just kind of turn up, and he doesn't seem particularly keen on research. I might be doing him a major injustice there, but I did hear him the other day ask what the nationality of the referee was, and you sort of think, well, it's probably on a piece of paper in front of him if he wants to find that out, but he just doesn't feel he needs to, and a lot of the time he's miserable, and there's a lot of misery in following football, and I think he sort of speaks to that. I think there's room for him, and I'm often quite grateful for that kind of persistent grumpiness in the face of this festival of football. There was a brilliant moment the other day where he was actually trying to say how much he enjoyed a Kevin De Bruyne pass, and he said he could watch that forever. He'd never get sick and tired of watching that, and he thought it was brilliant. And most people say they'd never get tired of watching it, but Laura would absolutely say he'd never get sick and tired of watching it. It was almost as if he was already beginning to be sick and tired of it. But he's a legend, and I think there's room.
The BBC, of course, have Gary Lineker up front, and then their three for the Tunisia game when England played them was Shearer, Lampard and Ferdinand. 21 million people tuned in to watch that. That is staggering.
It is. It just shows you that, England at a World Cup pulls people to the sofa in a way that very little can be said to. 21 million is... Those are the sort of audiences that you look back and think television will never get again. People talk about Only Fools and Horses at Christmas, and the Morecambe and Wise Christmas shows in the past, those great things that would draw people in that exactly that quantity, 21, 22 million. And everyone says, well, that's over, but actually it's not if you put England in a World Cup and throw it at people on the BBC. They turn up.
They certainly did. And each side, talking of new pundits, have female pundits at this World Cup for the first time. The recently retired Alex Scott is at the BBC, and the Juventus striker Eni Aluko is out there working for ITV. A great addition?
I think they're both really good additions. I mean, the obvious thing to say is that this should have happened a while ago. And the other obvious thing to say is it's new, and so people are kind of going to bridle about it, and you see that definitely on social media. People, and you see it also, even rather disappointingly, in the reaction of Patrice Evra, who had that scene with Eni Aluko where he applauded her, and it was just sort of wince-inducing to watch. But the thing is, it's going to be like this, and you have to assume that. This is just a stage, and 2 or 3 years' time these people will still be, women will still be talking on football shows, but no one will be talking about the fact that they're women. They'll just be talking about what they're saying, and I guess we just have to get through this stage.
Changing people's opinions is what needs to be done, and unfortunately the same could be said for Vicky Sparks, who became the BBC's first female commentator at a World Cup. Again, great to see the BBC doing something different, but unfortunately a lot of negativity, but she did a grand job.
She did, and it's not, I don't know what the argument is against this, like this is some kind of specifically male thing or specific skill set that only men. I mean, it's just bizarre to be talking like that in 2018. Women watch football, women talk about football, especially a television audience is made up of women as well as men. My 14-year-old daughter passed through the room while Vicky was doing her commentary, and I asked her if she noticed anything different about what was going on, and she had to stand in front of the screen for quite a long time before she did, and she said, "Oh, is that a woman commentating?" Eventually, and it occurred to her eventually that was different from something that she'd heard before. But I think it blends in more naturally than the people reacting to it badly on social media are allowing.
Well, let's hope the new generation are perfectly accepting of it all, because as we were saying, Vicky Sparks did a very good job, and commentary is so very, very hard. Just finally, we mentioned it was 1-0 to ITV because of their set. Overall, with how things are going, what's the scoreline going to be?
I think probably I'm going to favour the BBC coverage. I like Lineker enormously. I also think Frank Lampard is a terribly good pundit. I probably prefer Guy Mowbray as a commentator to many of the commentators that are on ITV. I just think they have the edge in a few key departments, but it's a very close thing.
So 2-1?
We'll call it 3-2.
It's close.
Yeah.
ITV could turn it around.
They could turn it around. There's a long way to go.
Uruguay beat Saudi Arabia in Rostov to book their place in the round of 16, and the result also means Russia are through as well, with Saudi Arabia and Egypt exiting. Giles, from an entertainment standpoint, we want to see Luis Suarez staying at this World Cup, don't we?
Definitely. He's one of those players you tune in excitedly to see. He comes bundled up with all that history, the destruction of England in 2014, the eating people. Plus of course he's very likely to score goals, and normally impressive goals as well. So yeah, definitely would be a shame to lose. We want him into the knockout stages.
Sorry, I'm still thinking about Luis Suarez eating people. It's not a pleasant thought, really. Well, of course, Russia and Uruguay face each other on Monday afternoon to determine who will top Group A. Now, as for Group D, Argentina versus Croatia, a win vital for Argentina to avoid going into what would be a final nervy game against Nigeria. Lionel Messi is looking to make amends, Giles, and he's always box office. He always delivers. Perhaps not yet, but normally does.
Yeah, you've got to hope he's going to at some point. I feel like, he's getting lumped together all the time in the comparisons with Cristiano Ronaldo, and which is a bit unnecessary because we can have them both. But inevitable at the same time, and I guess he failed that first test of following up the Ronaldo hat-trick with a performance that in the first game and missing the penalty. So he's got it to do to get back in. But the first time he was on ITV, and this time he's on BBC, so maybe that'll make the difference.
That could be the difference, you're quite right. There have been flash floods and thunderstorms in Nizhny, where that game will be played. Some locals had to be rescued as the waters rose quickly, so we wait and see if that has any effect on the pitch on Thursday night. In contrast, after their opening 2-0 win over Nigeria, any positive result for Croatia will put them within touching distance of the knockout rounds. That's it for now. Many thanks to my guests Giles Smith, Gab Marcotti and Paul Joyce. Subscribe to The Times and The Sunday Times to enjoy award-winning journalism online and on your smartphone or tablet. For a limited time only, it is just £1 a month for your first 3 months. Search The Times sale for more information. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast supplier. We'll be back on Thursday in the company of Alison Rudd and Matt Dickinson. See you then.
The Game is brought to you by The Times. For more information and more podcasts from The Times, head to thetimes.co.uk.